Welcome back to the Modern Hippie Podcast. I am so excited today to have Dr. John Churchill joining me again, who is a doctor of psychology with deep studies in psycho-spiritual development, integral theory, Mahayana Buddhism, mysticism, and my favorite, psychedelics. John is an author and co-founder of Planetary Dharma, which is a program I have been a student of over the last 2 years alongside you. And well, thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you, Barrett. Happy to.
Yeah, our journey together has been, my journey with you has been really cool. I first heard of you on the Aubrey Marcus podcast as you walked everyone through this metacognitive awareness practice. And I was kind of fresh out of the Amazon jungle, having done ayahuasca at the time. And that just stood out to me because you were bringing in all of these sensations and awarenesses and things that I typically only experience in the medicine or recently off an ayahuasca retreat. And so I was like, John has some information that I don't have, and I need to know that information. It sounds like you know where to go from here. And I remember I did your workshop on metacognitive awareness, and you said to me, I had this idea that I lose it after a certain amount of time. And you said, well, that's your own self-limiting belief. And I thought, okay, I have to know more. What is this? And so that was then when you launched year one of Planetary Dharma.
Right.
And it's been everything I hoped it would be.
Right. So metacognitive awareness, that's a good place to start. I mean, really, what are we talking about when we're talking about metacognitive awareness? Well, when we talk about metacognition, that means like thinking about how you think, right? Which of course is that's significantly developed psychologically. Actually, I don't think most people on the planet actually think about how they think. But metacognitive awareness would be more, even more refined than that, which is, being aware of various processes within one's experience in such a way that they help open or reorganize or facilitate development. You can look at, well, you tell me. I'm curious. Like, what was what did that open up for you?
For me, metacognitive awareness opens up this deeper listening into the field. As we begin to become more embodied and have more awareness, it's like you go from being able to place your awareness in your finger, which was a practice I was doing last night, studying something. And, where your attention goes, your energy flows. And so metacognitive awareness begins to bring our attention just ever so slightly like outside the body, into our subtle body, in the auditory field, into listening to the sound between the sounds. I loved trying to find where the sensation of my skin ends and the sensation of around it begins. And you kind of walked us through that feeling of, you keep searching for this infinitesimal small place, and yet you're not finding it. And it just starts to bring that awareness to the really subtle realms. And for me, that's where a lot of the intuition comes from. That's where a lot of being able to feel someone else's emotions come from. Or as an energy healer myself, being able to feel other people's energy fields and where they're blocked is a really important skill set. And then also in meditation, as it directly applies in the 9 stages of Maitreya that we've been studying, which is the path to equanimity. It develops this deeper sensation and ability to perceive the emotions that will then bring up, and the being able to blast off into the cosmos in meditation if you so desire. It kind of like really lays a cool foundation for receiving information in the field.
Right. So I was just thinking how we can break this down for our listeners so they can get a clearer sense of what we're pointing to. I guess at each stage of development, there are particular psychological processes that if you're aware of them, they help that particular fulcrum, that particular stage, organize itself and fulfill what it's meant to fulfill. And you can look at nearly all psychopathology, all psychological injuries as a lack of particular dimensions of metacognition, right? So from the most basic, like, oh, do I feel safe right now? All the way up to the most advanced, which would be like, is there a boundary between myself and the world? One way of thinking about it, all of those metacognitive injunctions, they're all questions, right? You can think that it develops, metacognition develops in a good attachment relationship. So to the extent that we were questioned as children, like, how are you feeling, Barrett? How safe do you feel right now? Right? Do you feel like I understand you? All of these are questions that when our caregivers ask them to us, they cause us to reflect on our experience, right? In some shape or form. So if no one's ever asked me if I feel safe, I might not even be aware that I am like continually feeling unsafe, right? So there's one kind of metacognition, which is like right now with our listeners, like kind of notice the degree to which you feel safe in your direct experience, right? And that can change, but we typically have a particular level that's there the whole time. Or notice to what degree right now you're able to increase your sense of being safe. And what do you do in your direct experience to facilitate that shifting? So when we take that perspective and we reflect on our direct experience, it begins to change our experience, particularly if we ask the right question, right? So what we discovered with developing stability of mind is so much of what causes us distraction and suffering are the unprocessed early childhood stages of development that can be strengthened through metacognitive restructuring, right? There's a certain kind of metacognition, for instance, that you can reflect on how well are you attuning to your own experience? And what does attunement do? It helps organize your experience. So it's one thing to be aware of your experience, and it's another thing to be able to be aware of it in such a way that it actually structures, right? So for instance, in a psychedelic journey, one thing would be to become aware that you're not feeling safe. Another thing would then to be aware that you're not feeling safe, but to be aware in such a way that you're actually going to help that part of you that doesn't feel safe feel connected to. And that's a different kind of interior relationship with your experience, right? Yeah.
I'd love to jump in here and share when we went through this particular month of training and safety and grounding, and as it continued to come up throughout our practice, I remember I kept kind of chiming in and being like, what does it feel like to not be safe? I hear some of my best friends say that sometimes, and it must be that no one ever asked me that growing up. And I kind of went on this quest of, what does that mean? Like, I didn't understand, only to find out through that quest that my nervous system was so still dysregulated at that point, that it wasn't until I discovered humming and got into humming for hours at a time and completely regulated my nervous system down to what I can only attribute to be homeostasis, did I realize what a completely safe and regulated nervous system felt like. And then I was able to reflect on the fact that, wow, there are so many things in my life that I have done at completely unsafe speeds. Like, I'm an Aries, I'm a pleasure seeker, I'm an adventure, like adrenaline junkie. I love like coming into brushes with death. And yet I'm able to reflect now how in relationships I never moved at a speed that was ever probably safe for me. And I'm doing that now at the first time in my life, like moving along with someone I'm dating who's just like, hey, we can take this at whatever speed. Like, if you need to back off, that's cool. If you want to hit the throttle, that's cool. Like, whatever you need to do. And I'm like, oh, where do I actually feel safe? Interesting. And I'm able to pinpoint what not feeling safe feels like.
Right, right, right. Well, there's two. That there's both the what you're pointing out there is that, I mean, this is why understanding your self structure is so important, because your self structure throws yourself out of an airplane, so to speak, to feel fearless, but actually you think you're conquering it, but actually you're overriding it.
Perfect. Yeah.
Right. And that just reminds me just of what we were talking about earlier, which was, on one hand, there is the wisdom of continuing to jump out of the airplane to get used to not having the fear, and the other piece is noticing that that's what you do, and meaning, yes, it's true that jumping out of the airplane, if you want to do it a lot, the more you do it, the better you get. And why are you jumping out of the airplane? Like, that's not the only path of growth.
Sure.
Right? So then if you go ask the sky jump, the skydive instructor, well, what should I do? He will say, jump out of the airplane more. Right? Yeah. So
You totally nailed it. I've always said for like 2 decades now, I just have this incredible fear override switch that I activate when in like terrifying or life and death threatening situations.
well, and you're probably super capable in those situations.
Yeah.
Right? But it does, yeah.
Yeah. But as I've seen this apply to other people in my cohort as well, as I went on this quest to understand safety, I didn't fully understand how important it was when it came to meditation. And I was able to witness and experience alongside others who knew what not feeling safe felt like. And to hear from their experience that they were limited in where they could go in meditation based on how safe they felt. And we really took the time to create these foundations of safety for then opening up into our own power structure and discernment and attunement and leaning into the field, and then being able to essentially kind of open the third eye and the crown and have these bliss body experiences that I had never known before that people felt unsafe to even experience.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, so safety, there's a relationship between the root and the crown. And so, yeah, like we tend to think that the world is solid. But if the world is really just psyche, right, which is what, if we really take the insights of the plant medicines and like, well, what would it be like to be in that state continuously? And we are in that state continuously. We just call it being a human being, right? But we've been enchanted into the disenchantment that it's kind of, that there's an outside world and everything is solid. But if we lived in a different kind of cultural situation where really the world was seen as being the psyche, like we're within a dream, right? Then of course, if you're in a dream, like the safety, your safety is intimately related to the depth of your surrender to what is. So we often think of surrender as being related to the crown, but there's also the surrender into like what is right here, which is related to the root, like surrendering down, right? Surrendering down into the experience in such, and then actually being able to see that experience is a dream, right? Yeah, it's our friend Hamilton has this, he has this teaching around sanctuary, which in my understanding is the same idea, which is really the teaching around being able to take refuge in the ground of reality. That actually, like, sacred world, like, if it's not good, you're not there yet, right? Right, and that and in that sense, faith is actually like the highest teaching, like living in faith, like living in trust is much more profound than, right, than maybe it sounds like when we talk about religion. But I think this is one of the reasons why religious people tend to live longer, is because really, if they have a deeper level of faith in whatever it is, we just do better as human beings if we trust our experience, no matter what that experience is. Yeah, and all the psychological research has shown us that establishment of security and safety is like foundational for all of the further stages, right? All the way up the stack. Yeah, so it's not as if the most foundational, we never like move beyond the foundational lessons, right? It's always there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
right?
and when you brought up that grounding, I had a really challenging trip 2 nights ago, and it was another one of these times where it felt like my consciousness was about to collapse, and I'd already had 3 of those in the last, like, 6 months, and I learned some really powerful lessons from them last time, and that was my own negative feedback loop. And so as my consciousness felt like it was collapsing, I instead adopted the mantra of, "No, I love this process. This is just a process, and I got this." And as I got this, I got up and I was kind of moving around the house, and I still was so full blown in the medicine. It was overwhelming, and it made me really nervous. It made me really anxious because I didn't know what to do about it. I was trying to give it up to God. I was invoking sanctuary left, right, and center. And I have been doing what's called a Dieta, where I invite the consciousness of different plants, trees, minerals to live inside me. And we deeply commune on that level. And so I invoked one of the trees, Tamamuri, and Tamamuri immediately scooped me up in his tree branches and held me, which is like one of my safe places as a kid. And I asked for the advice, and he said, your franticness is causing more franticness in your experience. And just in those 60 seconds of realizing what Tamamuri said and how I was creating more of that, we took that tree energy and we just grounded deeply in. And the overwhelmingness of my whole experience just settled to become something completely manageable, completely something that I could work within. And then I got to have like a playground and play for a little bit.
Right. Well, what that reminds me, Barrett, is how, for all of us, how much of what arises in our experience, and we see it heightened in the psychedelic experiences, that there's trauma that comes from content that's like scary and overwhelming, But there's also the trauma that we don't recognize that is being projected by the fact that the frames that we have impurities in them, have cracks in them. The glasses that we're wearing, right? So, as you said, if the glasses that you're wearing have like a crack, which is like, I can't handle this, it's overwhelming, right? And that's actually like the deeper metacognitive. So that's a metacognitive injury. Because what's happening then is if you have that injury, then whatever you're looking at in your direct experience, you're projecting it into the body. And of course, with psychedelics, that becomes a whole reality, right? That becomes a whole reality until the tree medicine pointed out to you that that you could have a stronger metacognitive stance with your experience, that you could be more commanding, more potent, more powerful, more trusting, right? Like it sounds like that there was something there to do with like your own sense of strength and capacity. Was that what it was, or?
Just so to, I guess, unpack these experiences I had a little bit. I've had 3 strings of different experiences on different medicines, a Bufo experience, an Ayahuasca experience, and then a 10-gram mushroom experience, where all those times I thought I felt my consciousness escaping me. I thought one time I actually collapsed the whole universe and destroyed everybody's lives and destroyed the whole universe. And then when I realized that there actually was still an Amazon and still a Maloka, then I thought it was just my life, my consciousness. I collapsed and I thought I was going to end up in a psych ward and all those sorts of things. And until I started to feel the medicine kind of wear off, and I was like, oh, right. I took something and it will wear off. And, after the 3rd one, I got kind of anxious of like, is this really, can I really collapse my consciousness? I've heard there's one particular woman in my field who did break one time, and Hamilton actually had to put her back together again. Long before he started Blue Morpho. It was when he was working under his other lineage. So I was kind of concerned that, is this boundary? And then once I found out, no, I'm just doing it to myself, it was kind of like, okay, I can do this. But there are aspects that feel very overwhelming in that situation, because the particular medicine I was doing was Pharmahuasca, which is experimental, and I'm experimenting with. It was my 4th time doing Pharmahuasca, and Pharmahuasca is taking DMT orally. And so it just really, it comes in multiple stages. There's like a stage 1, and then it completely wears off. And then like an hour later, it ramps back up for a whole nother completely full-blown stage 2. And so there's kind of like this shock to the nervous system that happens, where I feel much more hooked up to electrodes than I do on ayahuasca. And I'm wondering if that's a mixture of the brew. There's other plants and things in there to kind of tame that experience that a good shaman puts in their brew. And then there's just insane amounts of nausea that I was experiencing. And then a full-blown, like heroic dose DMT amount that started to make my brain would begin to think in like dashes of words that don't make any sense. It would be like wealth, mountain, potato, 7, coin. So like I could kind of still coherently think, but when I wasn't coherently thinking, that was popping off in my head. And that was where I got to be a little bit like, oh, this is not, I don't feel in control of this situation. And I'd like to be.
Right. Yeah. Well, I mean, just reflecting on it from a kind of Buddhist perspective, if you will, those kinds of experiences ask of us to discover like that which is indestructible about the nature of awareness. Right? Because, when consciousness or the thinking mind deteriorates to the extent that you've metacognitively recognized that you're not that, then it will give you the strength to like keep going. And that's like that's got to do with that's the relationship of your solar plexus and your clarity. So how powerful, like what does your power field fuel? Does your power fuel, do you use it to fuel your personality, or can you use your power to fuel the brightness of your awareness to literally see that all of this is a construction? There's you probably heard that the kind of the story, the psychedelic myth of Ram Dass giving his guru Neem Karoli Baba a bunch of LSD.
Yeah.
Right? So if that's a teaching story, what that really is about the strength of awareness. Like if someone's awareness in Ayurvedic medicine and in Indian medicine, there's a literal relationship between your digestive fire, like your capacity to digest experience, and which is also related to your ability to digest food or to digest anything. So at least I played a little bit with this when we were in the Amazon.
So fun fact for my listeners, John and I were in the Amazon for 2 weeks together doing ayahuasca 2 summers ago.
And so I was like, well, what happens if I wire my energy system up like that? Which is like, okay, I'm going to connect the strength of my awareness to my solar plexus, and I'm going to metabolize everything. I didn't experience any nausea nor vomiting, nothing like it. And it was but I didn't continue like that because I'm like, I'm an amateur here. I want to understand, like, I don't want to like go in like trying to master something without first like having a sense of what this is. But what it did teach me, which was the strength of your awareness, the strength of your digestive capacity. So in this instance that you're talking about with your experience, what is your ability of your awareness to digest something that threatens like the self structure? And to the extent that your awareness is like a fire, then it's going to metabolize the experience. It will metabolize the fear. The other way of putting that is symbolically, right? So if you were to describe the situation symbolically, you have a situation in which you feel like you're going to get obliterated, right? So the situation is a monster. It is a terrifying monster with teeth and weapons, and right, and of course, you know, when I've known that experience. In that situation, one feels like a victim, right? So at a very base level of the psyche, there is a level of predator and prey. Right? It was the deep, and we all, which is one of those levels or layers that needs to be metabolized. And when you metabolize that, that's one of the ingredients for like transcending death, right? Because you become you become the destroyer of death. So how badass, terrifying do you need to be able to destroy death, right? Because the way that you do it is you become that which is terrifying you, right? So in the sense of that it's full of strength, like whatever that experience was, if it was a dream, right? You dream that up. We dream that up. So if I dream that up, that it also means that that's me, right? So if it's you, if it's me, then it's a part of you, part of me that we haven't yet integrated. And of course, integrating that at that level, that is not a light thing to do, right? That's a significant degree of mastery, of like continually exposing yourself to threatening situations until you realize that your awareness has the power to cut through, right? Like that the situation isn't diamond hard, your awareness is diamond hard.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah, you make such a valid point in that integration piece, where my first experience like that was in May, and I walked away being like, I don't know what that means, but I'm going to have to sit on it. And sometimes integration takes time. Sometimes it takes weeks, months, years, lifetimes. And so it was, what is it now, November? It was 7 months later that and even last month when I had the 10-gram mushroom journey, that I started to realize the pattern and know that I could overcome it. It took me that long to understand why I was having those experiences, what they meant, unpacking them, figuring out how to get through them. And I'll say for anyone listening, like I'm training to be a psychedelic facilitator. I mean, I am one already, but in a bigger context, in more of a shamanic way. And so this is all really part of the building body for being in the medicine and knowing every aspect of the medicine space. For me, it's an upgrade in the work that I do, being able to experience these things and relate them with the clients that I work with, and being able to know, for me, then realizing, as you said, it's like my own psyche that was having these negative feedback loops, and finding out how to break them, how to interject them, how to find the new loop that correlates to my life at the moment, and getting in that new loop and having new energy behind it. And yeah, reclaiming that sense of power, that sense of control, that like reclaiming what I call being the pilot of the spaceship in those experiences.
Yeah, being the pilot of the spaceship. Yeah.
So the Buddhists love psychedelics, as you've educated me that these are all psycho-spiritual technologies of Buddhism.
Mm-hmm.
What does that term mean? And what are some other of the
What do
tech?
we mean by psycho-spiritual technologies?
Mm-hmm.
Wow. Well, any technique is a technology. I think we have to discern also the difference between wisdom and technique, right? In that sense, in its essence, Buddhism is a wisdom school, right? Philosophia, like the love of wisdom or love wisdom, right? So that kind of speaks to like the heart of the matter, right? And then we have technology. So what's the difference between the two? I guess you could say like wisdom is related to the kind of like the intrinsic being. And technology, as with anything, speeds shit up. Really, that's what it does, right? I mean, facilitates learning, speeds up learning. So the technologies are those that facilitate, the developmental process. We don't want to confuse wisdom with technologies, but then, okay, so what are the technologies? Well, meditation is a technology, right? The breath work is a technology. I mean, really, in Buddhist psychology, the whole meditation process is one form of technology, and then you have the alchemical process, which is more tantra, which is then even more technologies, breath work, body work, visualization, um, extreme states, whether that's extended dark retreat, or whether that's lucid dreaming. I mean, those are all the psychedelic, if you will, tools. And then sometimes in the past they even included what they called soma, which was some form of psychedelic along with all of those techniques. So, well, as you know, if you hum for 6 hours, something happens,
It's true.
right? You know, and so there's a difference, obviously, between wisdom, which is in some ways has got to do with becoming curious about how things are right now, and it's always right now, versus okay, now introducing something right now to make something change. So the Buddhists were, they always want people to, if we use the language of kind of Western psychology, they want to establish a really good foundation in understanding your own nervous system, right? So of deep mindfulness, of being able to discover a sense of safety and security and attunement, and to understand the best ways of what you and I need to do to maintain that quality in our lives. And then from there, they go to opening up to the wider field, opening up to a wider level of motivation, opening up to a more expansive heart. And then they introduce the psychedelic techniques, if you will. So in some ways, it's quite different from how many people maybe come into psychedelics today, right? Just kind of. So there's a curriculum based on their appreciation of what's needed, so to speak, in order to reduce suffering. Because as you well know, psychedelics can definitely increase suffering.
Found that out.
Right? And they're a technology, right? I mean, technologies are neutral, right? I mean, you got to train in someone who has mastered that technology, but in and of itself, they're neutral. So Buddhism contains a vast amount of psychotechnologies, right? To really basically hothouse human development.
I think one of my favorite things I learned when we had our retreat back in May, our Planetary Dharma retreat, was that the mantras and the kriyas and things, they become encoded with the power and the experience of all of the people who have used them before. So it's almost like they're these amplifier technologies that you get to tap into. And what a powerful tool to be able to use. What a powerful technology.
Right. Yeah, I mean it's a similar technology, similar but different to working with plants in the Dieta, right? That when you work with a plant, you are tapped into its living archetypal intelligence. Same thing with a mantra. It's been shaped by generations of practitioners to be connected to a particular dimension of human experience, right? Over thousands and thousands of years, and then even beyond that, interdimensionally. So in that sense, they're timeless. So it's not even like 1,000 years of that mantra. It's even beyond that. But yeah, you're tuning into a wavelength. So all of those kinds of technologies help to speed up whatever process we need to be engaged in. Of course, the challenge is if you walk into Tibetan Buddhism, for instance, from the front door, and there's 10,000 technologies, like, right? Like, where do you...
What do you use?
What do you use? Where do you start? What do you begin with? Yeah. I mean, that was one of the reasons why Carl Jung, the eminent Swiss psychologist, was a little hesitant with us as Westerners, using advanced tech from other civilizations, because frankly, we're not very advanced, right? So we have to, we have a lot to learn. We have a lot to learn from indigenous cultures who have developed, with plant medicines, and it's the same thing with the with the meditation technologies. It's like we have to realize that we have to like begin in some ways, like begin from the very beginning, right? Like relearn what it's like to have a relationship with the imaginal realm, how to have the right relationship with the sacred. I think a lot of people though have proved Jung to be wrong, meaning Westerners we can, like learn these things and adopt these technologies. A lot has changed since the 1950s, 40s, when he was writing. But it is true that we still don't yet have kind of let's say, an integrated curriculum, right? So we're still going over here and going over here, and of course it's easy to miss some things.
I can absolutely see that. I remember when I had my humming transmission back in January, and I got taken to the temple within, to these ascended master Buddhas, and they were teaching me things and whatnot. And I came out of that and I was like, the only person I knew who to talk to about it was you. And I was so grateful to have you in my life, because I was like, where do you go to research this? I was blown away by how long I had sat down and hummed and ohmed essentially. And I was like, well, do they know that this is where you go? They must. And you kind of took me under your arm and you said, Barrett, you've kind of stumbled into a cave and discovered all of these ancient technologies, and you've been poking at them. And now we have to teach you how to use them. But it's been an incredible tool to integrate into my life, into my world, and to play with, both in terms of a breathing and a humming practice.
And I'm curious, did you remember to hum during that collapse experience?
I did not hum during the collapsed experience. I could have this last time. Yeah, I didn't turn to it as a tool. That would be a great tool.
Well, I think that all of those tools involve a pilot. I think it's what you're saying is when you lose your ability to pilot and you forget that we forget, like, oh wow, I can affect change here.
Mm-hmm.
Right? I mean, it might not be an Icaro, so to speak, but it is a hum. It's not, right? It's a start.
I did get one of my drums out, and I was just doing some sort of trance drumming and just holding a beat. And I was impressed at how much that really calmed the field. And then I started ohming with the drum too. And that was incredibly beautiful. So
yeah, it's difficult to remember in those situations that we have control. I think maybe that's the it sounds like the part of the theme for you is to remember when you go into these situations that's going to be tested.
And I'm noticing the story for me is a little bit that for years I was taking psychedelics by myself in my bedroom because they were offering these transformations for me to look through lens, to heal, to do all that deep healing work. And I didn't understand it, but I knew it was working. And then as I got more adept at it, I started taking bigger doses by myself and using those for spiritual exploration. And it wasn't until 2 years ago when I met Hamilton that anyone was able to tell me anything about navigating in that space, about being able to change and be the pilot of my own experience instead of just the laid back recipient of what's coming up, and I'll deal with that. Oh, what's that? I'll deal with that. What's that? I'll deal with that.
So what if you were to share with us, like, what are the piloting? Like, okay, so one thing we were talking about here is like not losing your shit. Okay. But like what are the other piloting skills that you could articulate, like for our listeners? Like What else is, what have you been like, okay, this is how it changes from being passive to active?
Especially on ayahuasca and DMT. Once you take a certain amount, you gain access to this like DMT codex. It's the codex of everything there ever was, everything there ever will be. It's not quite the Akashic records, but for me, it's this almost like ball, I guess is what I'm shaping with my hands. And I can summon, so I can use my heart to hold love. I can send that love into my third eye, and I can feel the frequency, search for the frequency of what I want to call up, for instance, an entity or a plant or a tree. So I'll use Tamamuri, for example, the tree. Tamamuri has before shown me its frequency. So I can be very exact in referencing this like radio frequency dial of all of the frequencies that there ever have been. And using that to kind of cross triangulate and call up. So when I summon Tamamuri, Tamamuri kind of emerges from this codex. I've also been able to, I spent a long time learning to summon the orcas. I thought that would be really easy for me. And I was really struggling to find their frequency. And once I found their frequency, it's like, okay, now I've got orcas all the time. I know it's like my third eye can reference in this actually 360-degree radio frequency where the exact frequency of orca is, so that then they come and join me and they teach me their lessons.
So does that mean that then oblivion, that experience, is just one of those, it's one of those codes that it's just one of the codes that you don't like so much? Is it, it's like, oh shit, I pressed the wrong button? Is it? Because what I hear you saying is if you keep your third eye open and aligned with your heart, then that's piloting. But then there's certain experiences where that needs to be like really, really strong.
Mm-hmm.
Right? So that so you don't lose it. Is that?
Yeah, my experience before I learned how to navigate and call things up at will was that there would be all of these different entities in my field, especially when I'm in kind of that breakthrough space. There would be all these different entities vying for my attention. And I would kind of just like pick one I liked and sit with it and kind of learn what they had to say. And sometimes they'd take me and show me their worlds. And I would just kind of be passively along for the ride. Like, oh, what do you want to show me? What do you want to teach me? I'm enjoying looking at you. This is your world. This is so cool. Like I was kind of just on like, fuck yeah mode. And so learning instead how to take control of the experience is like, having Tamamuri help build me a firewall against all of these entities coming at me all the time, so that I can have a clearer screen and a clearer view and a clearer one-on-one with the entities that I do call and summon. And so having that sovereignty of, I want to fortify the walls of my navigation so that I can have a clear communication. And that requires me to be grounded and calm and listening. It requires me to be focused. When I'm not so focused on them, they can kind of disappear. So you really have to hold that focus. And I find ayahuasca specifically, and so essentially DMT, to be very reliable in that sense of, if you don't just sit back and go on the ride, you can instead pilot the spaceship and meet with whoever you want to meet with, learn from whoever you want to learn from, past, present, future. It's all there, and the true wisdom is available.
So the question that comes to me around that for you then is, so if that is here right now, right? So that's here right now. And of course, that oblivion experience is here right now. Like, what is it that you would need to do right now to like to deepen your security, so that if that oblivion experience was arising, that it wouldn't phase you?
It's interesting because I have had some oblivion experiences that were beautiful. The first time I broke through on DMT, It was like the deeper I could relax and release, the more I dissolved into this space-time around me and became nothing and became me again. I've also had others where I've been terrified that that same thing was gonna happen, and then realized that the fear was my own construct, and if the fear was irrational, how could I relax and enjoy the experience? And after last night or the other night's experience, I would say bringing in a deep sense of grounding and bringing in whatever is going to feel like protection and safety. So for me, I now know that that's the trees. And when I'm facilitating in ceremony, when I see things start to get out of hand for people or someone else is having a challenging trip, without even having to go and talk to them, I can bring in more tree energy and I can ground the room
Right.
in a group context as well.
So what I would then ask you is, well, what is it like then to practice being with those trees? So let's say the difference between let's say a shamanic practice and then making it like a contemplative, like a stage of development would be like, how do you in any one moment of time, what degree are you metacognitively aware of your own tree energy right now?
Mm.
And then, because it sounds to me like you have you can you can um, you can call it to mind, right? But if it was like if it was psychotherapy, so let's say if we were working on, let's say, something like attachment and psychotherapy, the first thing would be like, okay, well, can you isolate that experience? Like, can you discover that sense of groundedness? Yes. Okay. The next thing is, how quickly can you re-invoke it, right? So how quickly can you evoke the tree energy? Right? That's the second stage. And then the third stage is, to what extent can you maintain relationship with that energy throughout the day so that it because the way that, if you remember, like, neurons that wire together fire together. So the extent that you, for a year, for instance, keep a tree there, right, it will become more and more a part of the self structure. And in that sense, then it becomes less of a technology. And now it's like, it, you are that,
Mm.
right? And just my sense is your progression of working with this experience is related to how deeply do you stay every moment during the day with that tree energy, and it becomes a part of you.
I love that reflection. Thank you.
Like, it's I mean, how would that feel as a practice?
It was certainly something I was walking away from these last 2 ceremonies with of, "Wow, that tree energy feels so good." I have 3 trees inside of me. How I would like to invoke that grounding all the time
Mm.
and that sense of strength and stability that comes from the grounding of these really wise ancient trees. And it feels really good.
I'm always like curious on our evolutionary journey, how consciousness awareness has passed through the mineral kingdom and the plant kingdom, animal kingdom, right? And I mean, I'm sure there must be some relationship between the animals, if you will, the power animals that one's attracted to, and the journey, and particular kind of journeys and that one has made as consciousness to this form. Um, what do you think about your own, like you as a tree, not the tree out there, right? I mean, invoke, but like, I guess that's the difference between evoking and invoking.
Mm.
Traditionally, in like Western magic, there's a difference between the two. One is something outside of you, one is inside. Um, I'm just curious um, how those plants live inside of us.
Especially through Dieta, the practice that I've done twice now.
Mm-hmm.
They The point of Dieta is that you go on this kind of strict cleansing diet to really purify the body, and at the same time drink a tea made up of whatever trees, plants, minerals you're dieting. And so these trees through that process get embedded in what we would call like our light column, our chakra system, and they start to grow and their wisdom and their so literally they do live inside of me. And there are, it's going to sound a little hippie to say, but there's conversations we have in my head, even when it's not full, we're not in the DMT thing. I can still ask for wisdom, still ask for advice. So in that regard, I am no longer fully human. I am now.
Well, exactly. I think that's what I'm. Is like we're not right, and it actually doesn't sound super hippie. It actually sounds that if reality is holographic, we are all our relations, and it's in those moments that we forget that we then experience that oblivion as being threatening when there's no relationship there, right? Where it's just complete isolation.
Mhm.
To the extent that we're deeply related to mineral and plant and animal and other human being, like the deeper the relationship, and there's nothing deeper than realizing that you are that.
Mm, yeah. And like you said, all of that information is around us all the time. Like, what is your level of awareness to be able to tap in to open that up? Some call that Akashic Records reading. Some call that being incredibly psychic. Some call that just simply gnosis and divine knowing. Some call that remembering. How do we continue to tap into that? And that's something I love that you've integrated so deeply into Planetary Dharma is just this sacred world and being a part of it and feeling that connection with the trees, the plants, the minerals. I love when we bring that stuff into meditations, even and if it's earth, air, fire, water.
Mhm.
There's that deep sense of connection that I think is often missing from society.
Yeah, and as you said, that it's also actually missing from Buddhism as well, um, because I think Buddhism often existed within traditional cultures. So the shamanic parts of the practice were part of the culture already, right? And of course, we've lost that.
Mhm.
Like, so we have to establish like the basic fabric of sacred world, right? It's like we kind of have to work out what the sacred village is. I think that
Mm.
Jung meant he was like, you know what, these guys, they've been in the caves for thousands of years. They've been in the jungles. We have lost something. We've lost just the basic sacred village, right? We've like, how did that happen? Mm.
Yeah, so true.
And tell me, um, I'm curious about, have you shared with your listeners around your experience with Dieta?
I probably shared a little bit. Maybe not. I've shared on my Instagram,
Uh-huh. Right.
but yeah.
Uh, yeah, I mean, I'm curious I mean, of course, the truth is what that points us to is we're always doing that because we're
Mm.
always eating, right? And we're always eating, and of course, we eat unconsciously versus consciously ingesting the spirit of right of plants or minerals. But how have you found that strength? How have you found that like strengthen your energy, like your body, so to speak? Like what's that process been like for you?
This time around, I'm really noticing it a lot more than I did the first time. I
Hmm.
think the first time I did 3 trees, cat's claw, and lavender, And that was more about kind of the initial bonding, but I did feel a deeper sense of grounding. This time around, I also added rose, cinnamon, quartz, and lion's mane. And I noticed a lot of physical sensations. So I've noticed the crystals kind of got into my crystalline structures and have reinforced. I feel like there's like a rainbow holographic projections inside of me now that have really fortified the system. I feel that Rose really brought the awareness to a deeper sense of compassion during this dieta and compassion for self, a softerness. The cinnamon put an insane pressure on my third eye that was almost painful a lot of the time. And the lion's mane had my brain firing so much on all cylinders. I started struggling to sleep. And I think that also helped attribute to my mind just having a million thoughts at once. And I bonded even deeper with my trees this time because I added them in to just get more of their knowledge and increase their ability in my light column. And so now I'm really feeling that deep grounding, almost like there's trees growing out of the back of me and I'm like deeply grounded. They're like, yeah, my allies.
You look more like a druid.
Thanks.
Are you with the trees or the rose? Are you then like finding the flowers yourselves, or the tree and the bark, or are you like, shamanic equipment? DigonAlley.org. I mean, so what's your process with that?
Well, so the trees, I went to Shaman Alley in Iquitos, where there's like a whole row of just like shaman stores.
Been there.
And so there's a particular, yeah,
Went to Diagon Alley.
there's a particular store that sells barks. So I actually had to buy another bag. I brought like 7 different kinds of barks home with me in these huge like bags. I had to carry it on the plane. I was so worried they were going to take it from me at customs.
Yeah.
Huge bag of all these barks I brought back. So I have the barks. That being said, there's other trees that people could use in their neighborhoods. For instance, I have a pepper tree on my corner here, and I've recently learned that it's very medicinal, and so it must be also a wise teacher tree. Generally, the medicinal ones are master teachers.
That's right. Well, so it brought to mind for me, like some of my not earliest, but like I have a really strong relationship with oak. Of course, the word druid means the knower of the oaks. A drew means an oak. There was this one by Mother Oak that was just massive. As a kind of teen, I would just spend hours like hugging, tree hugging. But of course,
do it now.
But it's an English oak. It's not an American oak, right? So I'm really curious about how do we open our reopen our relationship with sacred world, where we find ourselves, because like we find ourselves here,
right?
And there's still something. You know what I mean? Like about like, well, am I gonna get oak sent from Gloucestershire when outside I have these other trees who are probably like, hey, right? I'm really curious about that, about those medicine trees that we find that are here in North America, because clearly they're the ones that have something to teach us about the environments that we find ourselves in.
Absolutely. I picked these other trees, these Amazonian trees, because in traditional Amazonian plant diets, that's what they use. And these are like the top trees that you start with. So I'm sort of doing that mix of like Amazonian shaman training as well as modern American shaman applications.
That sounds like you. That's right. And so does the Dieta, is that a fasting process for you? I know some people fast completely, or is it a light diet? Like what is it that you do for your Dieta?
The traditional way is white rice, boiled eggs, boiled chicken, boiled plantains, and then this one awful kind of fish. And I really enjoyed this time having the chicken and the eggs and the no fish, because the fish, it didn't need to happen. But the objective is not in taking salt in the diet either, so you can't
Uh,
season anything. And then there's a tea that you make of what you're dieting, and you drink that tea for at least 4 days during your diet. And then when you break diet at the end of, so I did a 7-day Dieta this time. The way that you signal to the body that you're coming out of that is by taking a spoonful of salt and swishing it around in your mouth on the morning of the last day.
Interesting.
Yeah. So by reintroducing the salt, you've let the body know, okay, the formal process is now coming to an end. And also during that process, there's no sugar, there's no caffeine, there's no sex, there's no dreaming about doing any of those things either. And then for the 2 weeks after, there's still no sex. For like a week after, there's no medications, there's no
No other herbs, for instance? Like you would just keep your herbs and your supplements away and just let the...
trying to get clarification on the supplements specifically. Because I think I'm maybe battling some parasites that didn't get dealt with on my last parasite cleanse. I'm interested in taking some methylene blue, for instance, and I'm like, oh, this is perfect timing. They haven't been fed for a week. I'm going to move from this into an actual like master cleanse type deal. Hamilton did say that even one of the most traditional ways, if you want to be super hardcore about it, is water fasting. So
Sure.
the clearer your vessel can be is what you want.
Yeah. That makes sense. Fascinating. Well, there's a whole technology there, isn't there? Like back home in the UK, the Druids, there was a whole phase of training around tree medicine. So they must have done the tree medicine with the psilocybin, because obviously they didn't have ayahuasca. Yeah.
Well, I want to be conscious of your time, and I still want to talk about the upcoming cohort for Planetary Dharma that launches in January. It is the first next cohort that you've had since mine started 2 years ago.
That's
And
right.
I will be one of the facilitators in training on that course. So helping to guide some of the meditations for small groups and things like that.
Yeah.
What are you excited about most for the upcoming January cohort?
Okay. Well, thank you. So this is like a foundational course. It establishes first, it's like we start with the attachment system, because I think that no matter, even if people don't continue to study with us, if people are able to internalize and get a sense of how powerful it is to be able to understand you have control over your attachment system, right? The ability to develop a deep sense of security, safety, attunement, power, personal power, all of those pieces. So that's kind of like a fundamentals of like user manual for your own psyche, right? So we start with that piece, and then teach that within the context of sacred world, of a planetary dharma. And what we mean by that is what's the larger view of why we're all doing what we're doing, right? Like, are we all trying to ascend? Is that what the is ascendance? Is that what the game plan is? Or perhaps is the game plan related to the living system that we find ourselves in, right? And actually coming home in a deeper way, like ridding ourselves of the parasites forever, so to speak, and then we do the 9 stages. So the 9 stages is basically your contemplative practice, 101. Like, what is the most fundamental, basic contemplative training needed, that's useful no matter what it is that you do. And so we're going to begin with a 5-day retreat for that. Teach all the stages, and then for the rest of the year unpack that even more for folks. And then the rest of the of this level 1 is looking into what's called the 12 links of dependent origination, which is really understanding how does this process of multi-generational trauma, like how does that unfold, So, the Buddhist perspective, or the planetary perspective, is that so much of what we're experiencing right now is the multi-generational and multi-dimensional trauma of the human species, and how it becomes compounded, right? And how, of course, that gets played out on a national and international level, and a family level, and individual level, biochemical level. So understanding the kind of, let's say, the sacred world's perspective on trauma, right? Super important, because no matter where you go and what you do, so much of what we're doing, and so much of what you and I have just talked about today, is related actually to trauma, right? These and these can be multi-lifetime traumas, right? So that's an experiential understanding of understanding the cycle of how it works in our direct experience. And then we're going to be looking at some of the kind of main different growth dynamisms that are needed to be understood on the path. So what I mean by that is that if you're going to make a journey, you got to have some really great maps, and you've got to understand the various processes that those maps are pointing to. So for instance, healing or cleaning up has a lot to do with stuff from the past, right? And we all have to understand what we need to clean up, because that's what we continue to project moment by moment, right? So your example of that scary place that you go to, and frankly, I know that place too, is that's like a early childhood trauma of oh my God, I can't handle this, right, from the past. And of course, we continue to project it. So cleaning up is super important. Waking up, so awakening. The awakening process is about learning to shift metacognitively your basis of operation beyond being located in the self to being located within that non-dual field, right? Which is what you were like, oh my gosh, wow, I can look at my experience in such a way and the boundaries open up. That's quite a different process from healing, right?
Very different.
Yeah, very different. So you got healing and awakening, and then you have growing up. And growing is different from cleaning it up and waking. Growing up is about maturing your understanding of the world. It's actually literally like the same kind of process that happened between 8 and 18. Between 8 and 18, you weren't necessarily cleaning stuff up. In fact, you were probably making more mess. Great. And you probably weren't awakening, right?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, some people perhaps, but you grew. Something grew and matured. So growing up has got to do with maturity, and that's kind of the path of the bodhisattva. And at a certain point of growing up, you start integrating, understanding how to clean up your past and how to wake up. So to put it another way, you wake up into the present moment, you clean up the past, and you grow up into the future. What is the world? The world needs us to grow up, to build a world, a new world. And we're not going to do that from our current level of development. That's just not going to happen, right? No way. So really understanding those stages of development, and not just theoretically, but how they live inside of you as different ways of thinking, right? Is that's a super important part of understanding the path. Otherwise, actually, people easily get stuck. It's too easy to get stuck, right? If you don't know about your shadow, and you don't know about where you should be growing to, it's too easy to just plateau. And then, of course, the last two kind of dynamisms we'll be exploring. One is what we would call opening up, which is really about expanding your intelligences beyond just the intelligences that you're particular typology orients to, right? So some of us orient towards, how would you put it? Some of us orient more towards kind of mathematical cognitive intelligence. Some of us orient more towards musical intelligence. Some of us are more kinesthetic. Some of us are more spatial. Some of us are more linguistic, right? And of course, what we want to do is actually open up those other skills so that we're not just relying upon the ones that we always rely upon. And then finally, that allows us to show up in the world, right? And so we've actually asked our good friend Ken Wilber, who's a world-renowned philosopher and who's written on these 5 different dynamics. He will be doing leading a masterclass during the retreat on kind of understanding these 5 different dimensions of growth. So essentially, those five dimensions of growth, understanding the attachment system and understanding multi-generational trauma and how it affects waking up, growing up, right? Cleaning up, so to speak, all that kind of integrated into a single training. So in our mind, that's a really good first semester at Hogwarts. And even if you choose to transfer to like the school in Transylvania or in Peru or wherever you, right? But essentially, like, what would be like first semester at Hogwarts? That's what we're kind of looking for there, which is like getting a sense of what are the core processes that we're working with. What is it that we're dealing with in terms of like the world out there and the world in there, the multi-generational, multi-dimensional trauma, and then really beginning to give y'all like some core contemplative and kind of psychoeducation skills to begin to heal the psyche. So that's kind of level 1, so to speak.
Oh man, fuck yeah. I gotta say, when I remember our first retreat weekend, like month 1, first retreat weekend, I used it to integrate my ayahuasca experience from the night before. Yeah.
It sounds like Barrett.
But I remember all of us were sitting in class being like, holy crap, is this really what we signed up for? And like really understanding what it was that was going to be portrayed to us. And retreats are just so powerful for me because you always unlock the next level of, you said, Hogwarts, where we all kind of find ourselves being like, oh shit, this is really what we could do next. No kidding. This is amazing. So I can't rave about Planetary Dharma enough. I can't speak of it highly enough for anyone who's listening. If you want to learn more about my experience, please reach out to me on social media or on Instagram, social media, or via email, however you connect with this podcast. I think our email's in there. And I would love to share more about my experience and share with why you too should be in Planetary Dharma.
Thank you, Barrett.
Yeah. So I will have your website linked up in the show notes where people can apply to be in the next cohort, as well as you guys have an upcoming Q&A session, a couple of them in December. That will be a time for people who have questions about the program to show up, and it'll be live with you and your wife, Nicole, who is also the co-facilitator, co-founder of Planetary Dharma. And you guys are such an amazing team for this program. I couldn't think of anything better.
Thank you. And we look forward to, please, if you're interested, check on the website, planetarydharma.com, the Q&A sessions that are coming up in November and in December.
Perfect. Well, thank you so much for joining me today, John.
Thank you.